Welcome to another episode of R&R Living Life as Rick and I continue on from Le Sueur National Park to the town of Jurien Bay, a seaside village devoted to recreational fishing, tourism and professional crayfishing. Situated on the southern end of Jurien Bay, which stretches over 9 kilometres from Island Point in the south to North Head, with waters of the bay sheltered by a string of islands and reefs which lie just off the coast. The coastline around the bay was first known to Europeans in the 17th century, when a French explorer Nicolas Bourdon and cartographic surveyor Louis de Freycinet sailed the area between 1763 and 1836, mapping much of the coastline and collecting samples of local flora and fauna, with the bay being visited by a number of English explorers from 1822 onwards. The bay was first surveyed by Captain James Harding, the harbour master of Fremantle, in 1865. The first settlement of the area occurred in the mid-1850s, when Walter Padbury, a self-made millionaire, took up land around the bay, and with the success of pastoralism, led to the construction of a jetty in 1885. Wool, bat manure, skins and hides, grain, and some manna gum was shipped from the jetty. The township was just a sleepy coastal village until the 1950s, when people began to build corrugated iron shanties as holiday homes, with the town site being surveyed in 1956 and officially named in December of that year. In the 1960s, the crayfish industry had expanded and a new jetty was erected, with a new marina completed in 1988. Cottages built for holidaymakers and weekend anglers were built on low-lying sand ridges beside the beach. I was intrigued by the swirling, stunningly blue waters against the white sandy beach at the jetty. From Jurien Bay, we made our way to Sandy Cape Lookout, about 10 kilometres north of Jurien Bay. We took the 7-kilometre unsealed road past campsites and fragile, pristine dunes that ran the length of the beach, before continuing on to Green Head on the Batavia coast, surveyed in 1875. Our first stop in Green Head was at Dynamite Bay, situated on a dramatic headland offering views of a calm turquoise waters protected by rocky cliffs. The beach was lined with seagrass. The Three Bays Walk, named for its scenic coastal location, is nearly 3 kilometres in length and winds along the shoreline, providing stunning views of South Bay, Dynamite Bay and Little Anchorage, and also provides access to secluded beaches along the trail. Fisherman's Island, south of Green Head, with restricted access, is an Australian sea lion breeding colony. Between the towns of Green Head and Lehman, we stopped to look at Mulligan's Island, in close proximity to Billygoat Bay. Lehman, a small crayfishing town where the turquoise waters, white sandy beaches, and offshore islands harbour a diversity of marine life, whilst inland vast swathes of native bushland stretch from the Indian Ocean to the Brand Highway. In town, some long-term locals and visitors refer to Lehman as Snag Island, originally the name gazetted in 1962, remaining so until the name Lehman being issued in 1971. Small Taylor Bay provided excellent views, with a 200-metre-long calcarenite point on the northern side and a 100-metre-long strip of sand located at the base of a steep eroding 10-metre-high bluff, with rock debris littering the rear of the narrow beach. Between 10 to 20 metres offshore were seagrass beds, while further out were reefs. The warm northerly Lewin current brings with it tropical sea life. These seagrass meadows and the absence of rivers flowing into the sea allows for very healthy conditions for this marine life. On our return to Arnebra, we passed Lake Indoon, a brackish freshwater lake which has served as an aquatic playground since the late 1950s, early 1960s. Usually a picturesque freshwater lake with the depth varying from approximately 1.5 metres to 5 metres, depending on the season and rainfall, and covering an area of 130 hectares. Unfortunately, we were to see it at its driest. Due to its sheer size, it is renowned for its abundant wildlife, with over 50 resident species. After a windy night, we left Anibra Rec Grounds and made our way along Three Springs Road through cropping and nature reserves. There was very little traffic on the road this morning. Three Springs, the town name derived from the three original water springs located to the northeast of the town, which were used by the early settlers and drovers for stock watering purposes, is a typical northern wheatbelt town on the Midlands Highway. This charming little town is the heart of wildflower country, though we were unlucky to see any wildflowers as we were travelling in autumn. With its economy based around agriculture, mainly broadacre grain cropping, sheep farming, and mining, it is known for its old-style wheat silos, visible from all roads leading into town. On leaving Three Springs, we made our way towards Dongara, through the areas of Areno and then on to Minganew, where we stopped for morning tea and a stroll around town. Minganew is a typical northern wheatbelt town with a railway line and is the largest bulk handling wheat facility in Australia and the Southern Hemisphere. The economy of the area is dominated by sheep, wheat, and lupins, with the town servicing the needs of the surrounding area. We checked out the Minganew Lions Park with its many information boards, such an interesting history. Across the road was the wheat sculpture that depicts the importance of wheat farming in the area and celebrates the fact that Minganew is known as the grain centre. In Cecil Newton Park, we viewed the glacial boulder, dropped from a melting iceberg during the early Permian Ice Age, about 280 million years ago. At that time, the Minganew area lay beneath the sea, and most of Australia was covered by a continental ice sheet, similar to that covering Antarctica today. We continued on through the rural localities of Moriarty and Irwin before reaching Dongara and Port Denison, part of the picturesque Coral Coast on the Brand Highway, divided by the Irwin River that meanders between the two towns. Dongara is reportedly the rock lobster capital of Australia, highlighted by the big western rock lobster as we entered the town, and is home to beautiful beaches, nature trails, and heritage buildings. We parked up at the RV park beside the Oval, while in the background was the Royal Flour Mill built in 1894, constructed from local quarried limestone to grind local wheat until its closure in 1935. European settlement around the estuary began in 1853, when a harbour master, Edward Downes, was stationed there to look out for passing ships, with the brigantine Leander wrecked off the coast that same year. Europeans continued to explore this area and eventually settled it permanently. By the 1860s, ex-convict small farmers were occupying the local river flats, and a flour mill known as the Irwin or Smith's Mill was operating. A town site was surveyed, and in 1873 it became the seat of the local council, established that same year. By the time of Federation in 1901, the nearby localities were populated by wheat and sheep farmers, centred on the hamlets of Bukhara, Irwin, and Strawberry. There was also a small population of fishermen, including several Chinese men, at Port Denison. The following day we drove out along Ocean Drive to Port Denison, originally known as Port Irwin, with the settlement beginning to grow when a jetty was built using both convict and free labour in 1867, with a second built in 1959 and a third completed as part of the marina in 1979. Port Denison is one of the largest and most productive fishing boat harbours in Western Australia, home to the rock lobster fishing fleet. Located on the southern headland at Port Denison is the Fisherman's Memorial Lookout, with its clearly defined red and white obelisk erected in 1869 with a lantern lit at night to guide ships through the dangerous offshore reefs. From the lookout, we made our way back through Dongara to the Brand Highway, passed the Big Lobster, and began making our way towards Geraldton. About 45 kilometres north of Dongara, we stopped to check out the historic settlement of Greenock, one of the country's best preserved 19th century towns. The valley where Greenock now stands was first explored by George Gray in 1839. The settlement's historic buildings are mostly built of local limestone, and at the heart of the town is a collection of 11 original stone buildings, including the jail, courthouse, police station, churches, and a school, while just beyond the area lies the ruins of the Wesley Church, the gracious old Gray's Store, Clinch's Mill, and the Greenolch Hotel, with the companion settlement of Walkaway just up the road. In 1851, Augustus Gregory surveyed 30,000 acres of land in the region, which became known as Greenolch Flats, that he subdivided into 20 and 30-acre lots, with the view of encouraging English settlers who would be more used to the relatively small farm sizes by Australian standards. By 1858, pioneer wheat farmers had settled the area, developing a highly successful wheat growing area with a population of over 1,000 people. But a series of disasters, starting with a major cyclone in 1872 and major flooding in 1888, as well as the discovery of gold in the goldfields, caused the gradual decline and abandonment of the settlement, so that by 1900 many of the settlers had left the area, their small farmlets becoming incorporated into larger farming properties. Substantial stone buildings, erected by the early colonists in anticipation of population growth, were underutilised or abandoned. During the course of the 20th century, many of these buildings became derelict or fell into ruin. In the years after World War II, motorised transport, television, and the decline in religious observance caused local institutions to lose their relevance, resulting in the closure of local schools, churches, the Presentation Convent, and police complex. Following World War II, the historic heritage value of the Greenolch Flats gradually came to be recognised. Greenolch Store, an entry to the settlement, was constructed in 1886, with the building serving as a store until 1936, after which it was used as a residence, and then becoming a roofless ruin. The school building was built in 1864, with the first teachers being James and Susan Rowe. It also served as a community hall and an Anglican place of worship. Police were first stationed in Greenolch in 1863, and 2 years later a resident magistrate. In 1870, work began on the construction of the police station, lockup, and courthouse. The cells were used to transfer prisoners to Geraldton upon conviction. A small enclosed exercise yard was located adjacent to the cells. The building complex served a variety of purposes, all associated with government services, including a meeting place for the Road Board until 1906, the police station charge room, a retiring room used by both the magistrate and visiting doctor, the police sergeant's quarters, a school teacher's quarters, a kitchen for preparing prisoners' meals, and from 1874 a post office. A stable for police horses and 2 outside toilets were at the rear of the building. Ticket of leave men dug a 22-metre deep well in the rear of the courtyard. St Catherine's Church, built in 1913 to replace the original, constructed in 1892, an iron and timber building that had been shipped complete with all furnishings from England, was on Company Road. Greenolch Road Board was the predecessor of the local shire, with the office built in 1906 and used for board meetings until 1952. St Catherine's Hall plans were prepared in 1893, but it was not until a few years later when sufficient funds were available for building to commence. Once completed, the hall soon became a popular venue for dances, parties, concerts, political meetings, and flower shows. The porch was added in 1901, and during the 1930s the hall was used as a school and later for social functions. Hackett's Cottage, built in 1888 after the flood of that year, while on land adjacent to the cottage, Ned and Harriet Hackett ran a store. Ned, being a versatile man, also acted as the community's blacksmith, cobbler, carpenter, and undertaker. The original cottage has been extended several times, the most recent being in the 1960s. No trace of the adjoining store remains after it was destroyed by fire. Greenock Village was certainly well worth the visit. The presbytery was built in 1900, furnished by the church and housed the local priest for 30 years. Monsignor Hawes was the last priest to occupy the house, with the building later being used as a boarding house for some of the older boys from the convent school. Goodwin's cottage was built in 1890 by the Catholic Church for Ned Goodwin, a retired policeman, and his wife, living there until Ned's death in 1912, when the building reverted back to the church. The Presentation Sisters used it as a school until 1958. The convent was constructed in 1898 to house a group of Dominican sisters from New Zealand who conducted a mixed day school in the large rooms until they moved to Dongara in 1901. It was then taken over by the Presentation Sisters, who ran it as a boarding school for boys. We then drove through the historic Greenwich Flats area that reveals some picturesque ruins of pioneer cottages, churches, cemeteries, and schools. A remarkable feature of the Greenwich Flats is its windswept trees, some of which are bent 90 degrees due to the prevailing coastal winds. We detoured around the outskirts of Geraldton, taking McCartney's Road to Georgina, then Edward Road before joining the highway to Drummond Cove Caravan Park, where we parked up and then went exploring the seaside city of Geraldton, the largest town north of Perth, both a seaside resort and an important port. We stopped to view the Horizon sculpture, a rather unusual sculpture on the Beresford foreshore. The 1.5 metre clear acrylic sphere, filled with 1,800 litres of water, where the light reflection inverts the surroundings on the horizon. When we walked around it, the view changes in relation to where you stand. Quite an impressive feat. From the sculpture, we made our way further into town to do some shopping before returning to Gidget. Later that afternoon, we spent time watching the sun sink over the Indian Ocean. What an interesting couple of days we have had. Stunning ocean views, pioneering history, and unimagined scenery. Every day of this adventure has been incredible, and I hazard to guess as to what lies next. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. Give us a thumbs up if you did. Join Rick and I next time as we explore Geraldton and the Chapman Valley. Take care and stay safe. Cheers for now, Rick and Rosemary. R&R, Live and Life.